Welcome to Who Are We, the space where we dive into consciousness, psychology, mysticism, mythology, science, symbolism, all of it.
Glad to be diving in.
Today we're tackling something really weighty, a phrase you've probably heard. God is dead.
Yeah, it's one of those lines that really sticks with you, doesn't it? Comes from Friedrich Nietzsche, late 19th century.
Right, the gay science, thus spoke Zarathustra. And crucially, it wasn't him literally saying, the divine just vanished.
No, not at all. It was more like a cultural diagnosis. He was looking around the last...
Seeing the impact of the Enlightenment, the rise of science.
Exactly. And he observed that the belief in the Christian God, which had been like the bedrock of Western morality for centuries, that belief was eroding, becoming, as he put it, unbelievable.
And he wasn't exactly cheering about this, was he? Some sources say he saw it as a problem.
He definitely did. He saw that this wasn't just about people stopping going to church. It was the whole value system built on that faith that was starting to crumble.
So if that foundation goes, what holds everything up? Morality? Meaning?
That was precisely his fear. He has this famous parable, the madman in the marketplace. Right?
Oh, yeah, shouting, God is dead, and nobody really gets it yet.
Exactly. The madman realizes they are the ones who killed God, but they haven't grasped the consequences. Nietzsche foresaw this huge upheaval, this kind of moral vacuum opening up.
And the big question hanging there was, what fills it? What comes next?
Right. Because if your traditional source of meaning and, right and wrong disappears, where do you get your bearings?
That sounds like a recipe for chaos, maybe?
Or for nihilism. That was his big concern. The idea that maybe life has no objective meaning, no inherent values at all, a real sense of what's the point?
And wow, thinking about that now, over a century later, it feels incredibly relevant. People talk all the time about a meaning crisis today.
They really do. You see studies showing declines in traditional religious affiliation, especially in certain parts of the world.
But at the same time, things like anxiety seem to be rising. People are searching.
Definitely. There's a documented increase in anxiety, a real yearning for something deeper, it seems. It makes you wonder, is this the fallout Nietzsche predicted?
Is this the world after the death of God? If you're finding this intriguing, by the way, do hit like and subscribe. We dive deep like this regularly.
So yeah, Nietzsche diagnosed the problem. But he didn't just leave it there, did he? He wasn't just a doomsayer.
No, he posed a challenge, right? If God is dead, can humanity step up? Can we create our own meaning?
Exactly. Which leads us to the Übermensch.
The Overman or Superman, which sounds a bit intense.
It does, but it's important to get what he meant. It wasn't about some, biological master race or anything.
It was more philosophical.
Right. It was his idea of an individual who overcomes that nihilism we talked about. Someone who doesn't need God or tradition to tell them what's valuable.
Someone who actively creates their own values, affirms life, even the tough parts.
Precisely. The Übermensch wouldn't rely on external rules. They'd have the strength, the autonomy to basically legislate their own meaning. It's about self-overcoming, shaping yourself.
So taking responsibility for meaning, essentially, not just inheriting it.
Yeah, a radical call for its time. Stop looking outwards or upwards for validation. Find it within yourself and your actions. Create your own stars to navigate by, you might say.
That's powerful. He wasn't actually advocating for nihilism then.
No, not passive nihilism anyway.
Yeah.
He saw a need for what you might call active nihilism, like actively questioning and dismantling old, maybe dead values.
To clear the ground.
Exactly, to make space for something new, something genuinely chosen and affirmed.
It's fascinating to trace how that challenge has or hasn't been met since then.
Well, you can see threads. Even before Nietzsche, you had figures like Marx talking about religion as the opium of the people.
Right, suggesting it was a kind of comfort blanket masking deeper societal problems, maybe sensing a similar shift.
Possibly. Then later, existentialists really grappled with this idea of creating meaning in a meaningless universe. Make your own essence through choices.
And you see it in the counterculture too, right? The 60s, the New Age movement, exploring Eastern thought, psychedelics.
Definitely. A search for alternative paths, alternative sources of meaning, which seemed to boom then.
And the internet age just seems to have thrown that wide open.
Oh, absolutely. Connecting people to every niche belief system imaginable, sometimes leading to some quite strange quasi-faiths as one source put it.
The marketplace of meaning just exploded.
And you saw that rise of the knowns people ticking no religion. But at the same time, interest in things like astrology, meditation, even occultism online seemed to grow.
The whole meaning crisis discussion really took off then, too.
It did. And then, well, the pandemic in the 2020s seemed to pour fuel on the fire.
Yeah, huge spikes in anxiety and depression reported globally. People were isolated, traditional supports maybe weren't there.
So many turned online, didn't they? To spiritual influencers, mindfulness apps, seeking new anchors in the storm.
Which brings us right up to now. Younger generations, Gen Z, millennials, often identifying as spiritual but not religious.
That's a huge trend. We're seeing booming interest in astrology again, the psychedelic renaissance we mentioned.
And even bizarrely, Early Lee talks about AI and spirituality.
It's out there. It really feels like we're in the middle of a major reshuffling of how people approach meaning and the spiritual side of life.
So let's dig into that 21st century picture more. The decline in traditional religion is pretty well documented in many places, right? Europe, North America especially.
Yeah, global studies show that trend clearly in the couple of decades leading up to 2020 or so. Less affiliation, less practice for many.
But like Nietzsche saw, the need for meaning doesn't just evaporate. It finds other outlets.
Exactly. That's the core of this meaning crisis idea. People, maybe especially younger people, are navigating this secular, tech-heavy world and feeling adrift, looking for purpose.
And the mental health data seems to back that up, sadly. Rising anxiety, depression, suggesting that not having that why can make life stresses feel much heavier.
For sure. And in the absence of the old frameworks, people often find substitutes, sometimes without even realizing it.
Like what?
Well, some argue consumerism can function that way, or technology itself. Even certain secular ideologies can provide that sense of identity, purpose, maybe even transcendence that religion used to offer.
There's that interesting idea from philosopher Nolan Gertz that technology is the new opiate of the masses.
Right. His argument is basically that the constant distraction, the easy comforts of tech, might stop us from asking those deeper, harder existential questions.
So it keeps us comfortably numb almost, preventing the real work of creating meaning.
That's the idea. He calls it passive nihilism. You're so caught up in the scroll, the online shopping, whatever, that you avoid the tough stuff. It echoes Nietzsche's critique of the last man just seeking comfort, avoiding challenge.
Okay, but it's not all doom and gloom, is it? The sources also point to this huge surge in spirituality just outside traditional boxes.
Absolutely. That spiritual but not religious phenomenon is key. People are building their own spiritual paths, mixing and matching.
And astrology is a big one, apparently. Surprisingly popular.
It really is, especially among younger generations, according to surveys. People using it to understand themselves, make decisions. Plus, tarot, energy healing, manifestation, often big online.
And the psychedelic thing, too. Not just for kicks, but for spiritual insight or mental health.
Yeah, there's renewed scientific interest there, and anecdotal reports of profound experiences, even shifts in people's basic beliefs about reality.
What about thinkers like Carl Jung? Is he part of this?
Definitely seeing a resurgence. His ideas about archetypes, the collective unconscious. They offer a framework for exploring symbolism and the psyche that resonates with many. People like Jordan Peterson draw heavily on that, too.
It feels like there's a kind of Gnostic thread in some of this, too. Emphasis on personal experience, finding the divine within.
Yeah, that's a good point. The internet makes it easy for people to find diverse wisdom traditions and weave them together in their own quest for inner truth. You also see things like quantum spirituality.
Trying to bridge science and mysticism.
Kind of, yeah. Borrowing scientific language for spiritual ideas, and even those Age of Aquarius hopes for transformation popping up again.
And then there's the AI angle you mentioned, AI as a potential future oracle or something.
It's early days, but the conversations are starting. Developing AI religious frameworks. It's wild and raises huge questions about consciousness itself.
It's a dizzying landscape, but we have to bring in the critiques too, right? Is this all just Marx's opium in a new bottle?
That's a major question. Are things like manifestation culture just soothing anxieties without fixing the root causes? Is spirituality just becoming another product to consume?
Good point. And what about the validity of some of this? Pseudoscience concerns around astrology, for instance, making bad decisions based on it.
Skeptics definitely raise those points. There are reports of negative outcomes too. And we also have to remember this meaning crisis isn't hitting everyone everywhere. traditional religion is still vital for billions.
Right. It's not a universal experience. Some places even see religious revival.
And another concern critics have is about community. Traditional religions often provided strong social bonds, shared ethics. Can these highly individualized spiritual paths do the same, or do they risk more isolation?
Hmm. So, wrapping this up, Nietzsche's God is Dead wasn't an endpoint. It was a starting pistol almost, a challenge.
Yeah, a challenge to create value after the old source seemed to fade. His Übermensch was the ideal of someone who could do that, affirm life on their own terms.
And looking around today, you absolutely see people trying to answer that challenge, consciously or not. That the spiritual but not religious, the blending of old and new practices.
People trying to hang their own stars, as that source nicely put it, trying to find meaning in this complex world.
But it's messy. There are valid critiques, the consumerism angle, the potential for pseudoscience, the loss of community maybe. It's not straightforward.
Not at all. The story of meaning after the death of God is definitely still unfolding. It's this constant push and pull between losing old certainties and the often chaotic search for new ones.
So it leaves us, the listeners, with a big thought, doesn't it? If those traditional meaning-making structures have weakened for many of us, what's our responsibility now?
Individually and collectively, yeah.
Yeah.
How do we cultivate purpose? Are these new spiritual trends a sign of humanity rising to Nietzsche's challenge?
Or are they just new comforts, new distractions? It really gets to the heart of, well, who we are. If the old God is dead, what stars will we steer by?
A profound question to keep exploring.